It's another Manly Monday, and you'll have to excuse me this Manly Monday. Some of you may know that there was a big internet outage. Cthulhu's like, this weekend. But there was a big internet outage in Canada last, was it Friday? But I live in an area where stuff's still closed on Sundays. And so I was supposed to refill my allergy medication on Friday. Couldn't on Friday. They were closed on Saturday for some reason. Couldn't get enough people to work, whatever. But then Sunday they're closed. So I'm I am not at my best today, but we'll get through it. I was gonna show like crazy violent Yakuza gameplay on this video, but I don't have the spoons to do that right now. I'm sure you guys understand. But yeah, sort of disappointing. Maybe I'll figure some reason to talk about it somehow. I'll save it. I actually captured the final Kiryu like Majima dragon ring fight because I'm trying to make a point here. But if you like this sort of content, despite extenuating circumstances, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/Leanna K. Okay, you'll notice I added to my background too. I added classic Moon Knight and Conju because I love Moon Knight, but there's no merch for the new one. And I'm like, I'm going to put Moon Knight because in part of that was me going to the people who you're biased against Batman. I love all comics. There's like I put She-Hulk and Hawkgirl and Power Girl, their little hero clicks, and then I put Crisis Flash, like where he's like getting all burned up, and then there's is that Orion? I think so, and then Dr. Fate, because I love Dr. Fate. So why does this matter? It doesn't. We're talking about are men inherently violent? And whether we should be using the language of being male being a risk factor for violence. And I have been stewing on this. It's funny because I try to not involve my husband in my content because, one of the ways to stay married in media is he has his opinions and I have my opinions, and there's some things we just don't share. But I actually asked him about this one, how he felt about it, and he immediately said, yeah, it's a risk factor. And I'm like, but that, if you apply that, you guys know what I like to do. I like to go, all right, if we change a word, does it still sound okay? And do we talk about, sexual assault? Is being female a risk factor for sexual assault? We're not supposed to teach women to avoid that. We're supposed to teach men not to do it, right? And I have to avoid the word because if I use the word too many times, YouTube demonetizes me. This is why it's by the way, it's really important that the Patreon support comes in for this stuff or the one-time donations, because YouTube doesn't like talking about this stuff. And I think it's extremely important to talk about this stuff. I can't contextualize it in any news item because you can't talk about any violent news item because you have to hit a box, and that's demonetization. It makes it really, really difficult to talk about this stuff. Of course, there are a completely different set of rules for people like the Young Turks and NBC and all these news services. The rest of us have to speak in freaking coded language. What are the facts? Well, they're not clear. And this is the beginning. I like to see what the science actually says. So not only did I spend a lot of time on this one mulling it over, I actually read a bunch of papers. It is amazing how many scientific papers I read in a given week over this stuff. And the stuff about a natural or a biological root for violence in men suffers the same problem as the video games and violence thing, is they tend to interchange measuring aggression with violence. We all know it's not the same thing. You know, there are a bunch of different ways you can be aggressive. You know, physically aggressive, you're verbally aggressive, you're sexually aggressive, you're me. You know, a big problem I get into is that I do not demur about things. I speak my mind, and I'm seen as hostile or aggressive when I'm not feeling aggressive. I think I'm just being upfront. But, you know, some people say it's a ginger thing. You're more visible and fiery tempers and all that stuff. But they do find that, well, one fact, yes, testosterone is linked to higher aggression. More risk-taking behaviors. What is the actual term? Sorry, I took notes. And if you listen to the It's Not Therapy for this week, last week, sorry, Dale Kurd gets into some of this. And I'm looking at my notes here. It's more the aggression thing is about risk-taking. Risk-taking, thrill-seeking, apparently that's what testosterone contributes to. And aggression. But what the science also says is that, it's just like Simon says, right? Science says, but science says that the average healthy adult male, because we're talking, you know, the average healthy person with an average amount of testosterone in their system for an average male. Let's be very specific here. That's not enough to make someone actively violent. You know, testosterone does not poison a man's mind to have to go out and hit things. Right? So, and this is where society shapes perception of science. Society shapes interpretation of data. And this is not me saying everything is a social construct. This is me saying you have a baseline, but then society shapes that baseline, which seems to be the consensus on this stuff. Any heterodox analysis of this stuff basically comes to this conclusion that there's something that's a mix of nature and nurture. Interestingly, some papers said that women in certain studies actually showed more verbal aggression than men. Men showed more physical aggression in observation, but women were more verbally aggressive. Why? Well, if it was testosterone making people aggressive, this is where we get into, well, okay, to be a real asshole here, a woman feels like they can mouth off and get away with it. You know, the whole talk shit, get hit thing tends to not go over well, right? You know, a lot of people, and this isn't right, but the whole I'd never hit a woman thing, right? And I'm not saying this is what I believe. I'm saying that these are the speculations. There's interesting other data in this. The rate of violent crime is higher, and of course, reported violent crime, right? The rate of violent crime is higher in communities with more females than males. But it's the men doing the violence. And again, there's a lot of theories as to why. I don't necessarily like speculating myself. I like to see, let's lay out all the data. But one of the theories there is that fewer male role models means less guidance, means more troubled young men, right? And so this is where we get into the question of, we know the majority of reported violent crimes, are committed by men. Now, I'm very careful to say reported violent crimes because, right, science says. We know the majority of reported violent crimes are done by men. But does that make being a man an inherent risk factor for violence? And if so, that's a lot of people who are potentially violent. And this is where I think it's interesting that, a lot of men will probably go, yeah, that's true. But this is where my abnormal brain starts going, well, wait a minute. That's basically suggesting men can't help themselves. We know that's not true. When we say things like that, we normalize the bad behavior instead of normalizing guys who can behave themselves and can keep control over themselves. And in a way, what's normalized is rewarded. So when we get into this the entire purpose of Manly Mondays, right, is to challenge this idea of a real man or an ideal man, right? And if, the ideal man or the real man, the archetype of man, to get Jungian, is violent, what does it encourage men to do? To perform in a masculine way. Be violent. So now we're in the chicken and the egg problem, right? Because people do match expectations. I don't remember who I had a discussion with this week about if you constantly tell someone that they are going to be something, you're programming them. And I saw that growing up in the Jane Finch area, Toronto. We were constantly messaged that we were little criminals. We were constantly accused of stealing when we didn't do it. We were constantly accused of being up to no good when we were just hanging out, being teenagers. And I saw one by one people fall to that expectation. If they're going to treat me like a criminal, why shouldn't I shoplift? I'm already being punished for stealing. I'm already doing the time. Why not do the crime? And I think that was really foundational to me because I had to resist that. Fortunately, I had Dungeons and Dragons since the 6th grade. And so I was like, lawful good, stealing wrong. I knew deontology before I knew the word deontology, right? Thanks to Dungeons and Dragons. By the way, that's the topic for It's Not Therapy this week. The benefits of play. So there'll be a lot of pro video game messaging this week. But, that's how I stayed out of it. But that's because I had counter messaging to the social messaging. And don't get me wrong, you had to be able to at least kind of throw a punch. You had to be able to physically defend yourself. Where I grew up, I wasn't the best at it, but even the worst person there was better than average, I believe. I mean, I see how much more aggressive I am than people who grew up more financially well off, in safer, more traditionally safe neighborhoods. So there is some coding. There is some what you need to do to survive. It's the eye of the tiger. It's the thrill of the fight, right? And this is where we get into social expectation, trauma, and the other things that human beings, including human males, are hardwired for. Because if you listen to It's Not Therapy last week, link in the description box if you want to catch up, the guest Dale Curd was talking about the fact that humans are lousy predators. We evolved for cooperation. So humans are, to separate male and female, to make all humans right now, instead of male and female as if we're completely different species, humans in general are hardwired for cooperation. That's why people with antisocial personality disorder or, dark triad tendencies, sociopaths are considered aberrations because they don't have that. Empathy and cooperation are tied. People are wired to feel bad when they sense other people feeling bad, the mirror neuron thing. And that encourages cooperation. That is also science that is going on in the brains of men as well as women. What does that cooperation mean, right? I mean, militaries are highly cooperative organizations, right? And it's not just to, get the other guys dead. It's also so that your team suffers minimal losses. It's a protective thing. But it's also building bridges and digging wells and the things you need to set up an outpost and an encampment and get through and all that stuff, right? There's so much more to military training than fighting. And I love it when people share their stories of being in the military because they do stress that sense of camaraderie and cooperation and the bonds they formed. And this is my idea. This is what has formed my idea of men, which is what made me think about the whole World War II paradigm when that was essential. Like we were all in it together. The war effort was all about cooperation, right? Yes, there was a draft, but they put a shiny coat of paint on that. So what's going on in these areas that they do see more violence, even though there are fewer men? Well, the actual risk factors that I found in terms of predicting actual violent behavior are extreme trauma, humiliation, shaming, social ostracization, and an element of indoctrination. And I think that's much better markers for potentially violent behavior. Because, let's keep in mind, there's more and more cases we see of people inciting, right? Talking people into it. So while some women with those markers, those pre-existing markers may not do the violence themselves, it's possible that we're missing that they're coercing or they're doing the indoctrinating of a man that goes out and commits violence. Now, there are some women who are violent. I grew up not seeing a difference because, oh my God, I saw many a hair weave torn out in a fight. And at that point, it was only women who wore weave. They were brutal fights. And yes, extreme trauma, humiliation, shaming, social isolation, and indoctrination. And so we can get around the gender thing and we can get around the poverty thing because poverty is humiliating and socially isolating, right? There's more likely to be extreme trauma in poor neighborhoods. So there's more violence, right? But then we get into the unique socialization of boys. And again, do not jump on me and claim I'm not saying that biological science is not real. I already addressed that. But we do see some things in the early indoctrination of boys, the ideology surrounding boys versus girls. We see when boys are developing the ability to name their feelings or not developing the ability to name their feelings at the age where girls learn to name their feelings and know what feelings mean. Boys are taught to hide their capacity for emotional perception. What does that mean? If a boy's sensitive, they're told to keep it to themselves. Where girls are supposed to be nurturing and considerate of people's feelings, boys are actively encouraged to hide that. And of course, all this stuff's going on in terms of formative, this is when gender identity forms too. So we're talking like the ages between 2 and 6 it starts, and then between 6 and 10, there's a lot going on. So by the time boys and girls hit 10 or 12, that the preteen years, there's already been a lot of messaging that is different. I mean, I said on the It's Not Therapy episode that kids' own mothers treat boys differently than girls. Girls are given more encouragement to express more positive, other-oriented emotions. That women are taught to suppress aggression, anger, hostility, all that stuff. That's not nice. Whereas boys are taught to suppress the nice. I don't know. Maybe. No, I was pretty discouraged from being assertive, but it happened anyway. That was before Dungeons and Dragons, by the way. We can't blame D&D for that. And this is where we get into adult. So basically, men are taught to externalize aggression. Women are taught to internalize aggression. And now we get into the, things we're not allowed to talk about on YouTube about self-harm. We see more self-harm in teenage girls than boys. Boys are taking it on others. Girls are taking it out on themselves. It's still aggression. It's still violence. It's just where the target is. And this is really important to keep in mind. They've studied the language of people in the criminal justice system. And men in the system are more likely to be seen as risk-taking or treated as risk. They're a threat. They're a risk to the community. They're a menace to society. Whereas women in the criminal justice system are treated as at risk. They're victims. They didn't know what they did. They're vulnerable. And then we get into sentencing discrepancies between men and women for similar crimes. Interesting, yeah? Like it's not just biology. And this is why when people are like, it's biology, it's social construct, it's biology, it's social construct. Stop, you're both fucking right. Like, holy shit, this is complicated. And anybody who comes down with false certainty on one or the other side is, in my opinion, trying to sell you something, or they have been sold a bill of goods. So, me, I was more external. I externalized frustration and aggressive tendencies. And maybe it's because a lot of my friends were guys. I don't know. I didn't actually I had one female friend, but she moved away. No, sorry, 2 female friends. One died. When I was 6, a friend died on Area India 182, and the actress who plays Kamala Khan, she looks so much like her. I mean, obviously older, but it freaks me out. But then, my other friend who I used to play Thundercats with, she moved away. And so they were the only 2 female friends I had growing up. Everybody else was boys. Until middle school-ish, when things got more segregated and it was weird or creepy back then. I understand it's different now, but back then it was considered strange. And then we got into high school and some guys came out as gay and it was all good again. I had a very singular formative years. But why does this matter? I always go, why does this matter, right? Because we really have to check our cultural reactions, because our collective cultural reactions tend to be emotional, not rational, right? We talk about this men being strong to protect. Well, like, let's face it, a guy with muscles, unless they're Superman, can't stop bullets with muscles. So being all tall and physically strong, like, what does that matter anymore? It really doesn't, right? It doesn't. And that sort of makes sense when somebody's feeling picked on, whereas back in the day you had those, God, this is really dating myself, with the old comics where it used to be, the scrawny guy who's picked on at the guy at the beach, the ads for, I don't even know what the ad was, but it was always this guy who it was like supplements or something like that. And then he got all big and muscular and then girls liked them. And like, it was not subtle. It was that you get muscles, guys stop picking on you and girls like you. Well, now the way people perform Don't Mess With Me is different. And, the results of violence are much more deadly because of that. Because people aren't settling things with fists anymore. They're settling things with technology that includes guns. And we get into the spectrum of risky driving, swatting, even stuff like doxing is an aggressive act. You're retaliating and stuff like that. And that matters when we talk about this stuff, because, it's all about perception and social programming and messaging, because Manly Mondays is about, among other things, the really conflicting messages that society sends to men. And this is why I know when someone hasn't watched a video until the end. We get with all this stuff mixed messaging, right? Teach boys not to be violent. Teach boys not to assault women, right? But then we get all these people saying men can't help themselves because testosterone. And you get some crazy unhinged stuff that's going on right now on Twitter that I'm not even getting into, that you gotta like pack up boys and squirrel them away, or, it's freaking weird, man. Because, that based on the actual risk factors, that's the absolute worst thing to do. We shouldn't lock our boys away. We should hold our boys closer, right? Because we're looking to avoid extreme trauma and treat extreme trauma, minimize and treat humiliation. Same with shaming, social isolation, and indoctrination. Locking boys away doesn't make things better. It makes things worse, because that actually is a risk factor for violence. And I know the cliche is not all men, but I immediately distrust anything that is boys will be boys, it's biological, men can't help themselves, because it's always ultimately stigmatizing, right? It's always this stupid gender dichotomy of men are the predators and women are the prey. And if you've seen my interactions on Twitter, you've seen what happens when people try to force me into that mold, right? Because that's not how I'm wired. That's not my instinct, right? I am aware of certain situations that are unsafe. But I remember when I was still working in television, there was this shoot that the rest of the crew were all men. It's comedy, right? It was comedy. So, and camera people, stuff like that tend to be more men, especially when the cameras were 40 pounds, right? But this is dangerous. We're going to a rough part of town. You shouldn't go. And I remember saying, well, if it's too dangerous for me to go, maybe the rest of you shouldn't go either. If it's inherently dangerous, we are Canadians in Los Angeles. We're not made for this shit. Of course, they didn't listen to me. They got kind of mad at me. They went anyway. They were like, afterwards, it's like, yeah, that was probably a bad idea. But I was so fucking offended that I was singled out, because that's the problem. If you're not allowed to take risks, you can't get the stuff for your real. You can't do the stuff that gets attention. You can't take the risks to show achievement so that you can get ahead. Because we're protecting women out of promotions, among other things. Whereas men, it's just too easy to prey on that men are predators and women are prey stereotype. And abusive people will use that. Not abusive people won't. The same way the vast majority of men are not violent, normal, healthy men are not violent. Normal, healthy women. You know, I hate the word normal. It's a shorthand because I'm running out of time. But healthy, adjusted women don't lie about this shit. Most people would not lie about that shit, but some do. It's the minority of men and the minority of women and the minority of everybody else, and Ezra Miller, that allegedly, that we have to worry about, right? Like, oh my God. Imagine if everybody was judged by Ezra Miller, right? And I admit that's the gut. I'm like, oh, why? Why does every article about them show them not, in their role as Barry Allen or the more conforming stuff? People run the pictures of the freak show, right? Like, fuck. These assumptions, these narratives matter. They're powerful. And people get stuck in them. Because if you happen to be a big, burly guy, a big, strong guy, I know guys who are just giants, okay? I called one guy a Wookiee because he's got this beard, right? And he's like this tall, right? But they're acutely aware. They don't want to frighten people. They just happen to be big. They don't want to shave. And so people get the wrong idea about them. They're like, people think I'm a biker. Fine people, those bikers. I actually loved where I worked as a model at modeled motorcycle gear. Star Wars and Batman motorcycle gear. A friend of mine had a license for the Star Wars license, and I wore my Leia bikini at bike shows. You can imagine we got a lot of attention. It worked. But I was treated better at the biker shows than Comic-Cons. No one, not a single bike show grabbed that fucking chain on my Leia costume. Not once. Bikers. Not once. Every fucking show at a Comic-Con. To the point that when it happened, it wasn't shocking anymore. I got angry. To the point that I actually had to, the last time it happened, somebody actually had to hold me back because I was going to go for the guy. And that's the other thing I find funny about this, is there have been times where I don't think I can restrain myself. And I will tell people that I would love to go to your event. I can't, because this other person is here. And if I see them, I might see, pardon the pun, see red. And I might take a swing at them. And I don't want to do that, so I'm going to decline. And people don't know what to do about that. That's not me being out of control violent. That's me being in control. And trust me, they've checked a lot. I don't have high testosterone levels. In fact, they dropped when I stopped eating meat. And testosterone don't grow these, okay? Like, so there's more going on here, right? We cannot both say men can't help themselves as biological testosterone makes men violent and teach men not to be violent. Hopefully this makes objective sense. If it is chemical, if it is hardwired, you can't teach people out of it. they know it's really, really hard to treat, going back to it, psychopaths. There is something abnormal with psychopaths. People who get traumatic brain injuries suddenly become violent. Abuse of steroids makes people more aggressive and violent. You know, I've had some close calls with certain wrestlers I will not name. Actual names. Those were very, very scary. Because there's something in the eyes. All of a sudden it turns and these guys go fucking psycho. And they think it's funny to hurt people. But that was at the time before the whole, oh yeah, everybody's on roids. Right? I don't think it serves anybody to claim being male is a risk factor for violence. First of all, the group's too big. Second of all, it makes normal or ideal masculinity seem inherently violent. And it's not. We need to make ideal, we need to make normal, we need to make archetypical guys who can control themselves. Not who never have an urge. You know, that would be hypocritical of me. But know what to do when they start feeling aggressive. And that's the problem when we raise boys or raise people like boys that can't name their feelings, can't control their aggression, don't know how to self-regulate their emotions, and don't know when to take a walk and cool down. That's when you get violence. It's not innate. It's not being a man. It's what we do to those men. And we know the risk factors. I read them off, right? Really interesting to hear what you think. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Well, Manly Mondays, that's the wrong thing. Wait, I was thinking I will know if you don't watch this video, but help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/LeannaK. And like I said, if you didn't watch the end, I'll know based on your comment. Have some self-restraint. Thanks for watching.